The winter wind whipped across the auction platform as Tessa Adams clutched her swollen belly, her thin shawl offering little protection against the bitter cold that swept through the small town of Seligman, Arizona. December 1878 had brought unusually harsh weather, matching the cruelty of her circumstances as she stood trembling before a crowd of jeering men, her worth reduced to whatever dollars they might bid for her labor, her body, and the unborn child she carried. Next up, we have a woman aged 22. Strong back, good teeth. 7 months along but still plenty useful, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the town square as he gestured to Tessa like she was livestock. Starting bid is $50. Tessa kept her eyes on the distant mountains, refusing to meet the gaze of the men assessing her value. Her husband's death 3 months prior had left her with nothing but debts, and her father-in-law had wasted no time selling their homestead and putting her up for auction to cover what remained owed. The baby kicked inside her, as if protesting their shared fate. $50. Do I hear 60? The auctioneer paced the platform, pointing at the gathered men. Tessa shivered, not just from the cold but from fear of who might claim her. The miners were rough men, the ranch hands little better. She'd heard whispers of women bought only to be worked to death or worse. I have 60. $60 for this fine woman. Who'll give me 70? Near the back of the crowd, Yates Xavier pulled his hat lower against the wind. He hadn't come to town for this. His journey into Seligman had been to purchase supplies for his ranch 10 miles outside town: nails, coffee, flour, the necessities to get through winter. The auction had drawn him in by chance, his curiosity a momentary distraction. But seeing the pregnant woman shivering on the platform, something stirred within him. $70, called a voice from the crowd. Henderson from the saloon, a man known for his cruelty toward the women who worked for him. 75. Countered a miner whose face was scarred from a blast gone wrong years back. Yates watched the woman's face grow paler with each bid. He'd lost his own wife in childbirth 3 years prior, along with the baby she'd carried. Since then, he'd poured himself into building his ranch, turning grief into labor. He had no business bringing a woman, especially one carrying another man's child, into his solitary existence. $100, he called out, surprising himself as much as the crowd. Heads turned to locate the source of the bid. The auctioneer's eyes lit up. $100 from Mr. Xavier. Do I hear 110? Henderson glared in Yates' direction. 110. 150, Yates countered immediately, his voice firm. The crowd murmured. The woman's gaze finally lifted, searching the faces until she found his. Their eyes met briefly, hers filled with uncertainty, his with a determination he didn't fully understand. 150 going once, going twice. 200, Henderson spat. Yates stepped forward, moving through the crowd. $300, he said, loud enough for all to hear. A hush fell over the gathering. $300 was a small fortune in Seligman. 300 going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Xavier for $300. Tessa felt her knees weaken with relief that she hadn't gone to Henderson, though her future remained uncertain. The tall cowboy who'd bought her approached the platform, his expression unreadable beneath his hat. He paid the auctioneer, then extended his hand to help her down from the platform. Yates Xavier, he said simply. My ranch is about 10 miles from town. Tessa Adams, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for outbidding that man. Yates nodded, noticing how she protectively cradled her swollen belly. Wait here. I need to finish gathering my supplies. As he walked away, Tessa stood uncertainly near the auction platform. She had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Her entire life had been reduced to the possession of a stranger. She watched as Yates moved purposefully through town, entering the general store. Inside, Yates approached the shopkeeper with determination. "Edgar, I need more than what I came for. I'll need enough lumber for a small project, some nails, white paint, and that rocking chair your wife was selling." Edgar raised his eyebrows. "Building something, Yates?" "A nursery," he replied, surprising himself with the words. "I'll also need whatever a woman in her condition might require. And a woman's things, clothes, personal items." "Saw you at the auction," Edgar commented, beginning to gather the requested items. "Never figured you for taking in strays." Yates fixed him with a hard stare. "She's not a stray. She's a person who needs help." By the time Yates had finished his purchases, his wagon was loaded with far more than he'd intended to buy when he'd ridden into town that morning. He returned to where Tessa waited, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "Here," he said, offering her his coat. "The ride's long and getting colder." Tessa hesitated before accepting his coat. "Why did you buy me?" she asked directly, needing to understand what awaited her. Yates helped her up onto the wagon seat before responding. "I don't rightly know," he admitted, "but I know what it's like to be alone when you shouldn't be." As they left Seligman behind, Tessa studied her new owner from the corner of her eye. Tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered skin that spoke of years under the Arizona sun. His brown hair was streaked with early strands of silver at the temples, though he couldn't be much past 30. His hands were calloused but gentle on the reins. Nothing about him suggested the cruelty she'd feared. "How far along are you?" he asked after they'd traveled several miles in silence. 7 months, Tessa replied, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Due in February," Yates nodded. "My wife, Clara, we were expecting too." 3 years ago. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead, lost them both. Tessa felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry. Been on my own since. Ranch keeps me busy enough." As the miles passed, Tessa learned that Yates ran a modest cattle operation with a few hired hands who lived in a bunkhouse on the property. He raised horses too, breaking and training them for sale. The ranch had been his father's before him, passed down when the older man decided to retire to California 2 years prior. By the time they reached the Xavier Ranch, the sun was setting behind the mountains. The main house was larger than Tessa had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch. A small bunkhouse stood a distance away, where lamplight glowed through windows. The barn was substantial, speaking to the success of Yates' operation. Yates helped Tessa down from the wagon. "First thing is to get you warm and fed," he said, leading her toward the house. Inside, Tessa found a home that was functional but sparse, clearly a bachelor's dwelling. The main room held a stone fireplace, a table with chairs, and minimal furnishings. Yates quickly built up the fire, then showed her to a bedroom on the ground floor. "You can stay here," he said. "I'll bring in your things. Kitchen's through there if you're hungry." Tessa stood in the doorway of the bedroom, uncertain. What will you expect of me?" She finally asked the question she'd been dreading to voice. Yates looked genuinely startled. "Expect nothing you're not willing to give. I didn't buy you for that." His face flushed slightly. "You need a safe place until your child comes. I have room, that's all." Relief washed over Tessa, though confusion remained. "Then why get settled in? Rest." "I've got work to do tonight," he said, avoiding the question. After bringing in the packages from town, Yates disappeared with an armful of lumber and tools, heading toward the back of the house. Tessa found bread, cheese, and dried meat in the kitchen and made herself a simple meal. The house was clean enough, though it needed a woman's touch, something she suspected it hadn't had since Clara died. Hours later, as Tessa prepared for bed, she heard the continued sounds of sawing and hammering from somewhere in the house. Curious, she followed the noise to a room at the end of the hallway. The door stood ajar, and inside she found Yates working by lantern light, constructing what was unmistakably a small crib. The floor around him was covered in sawdust, and against the wall leaned pieces of lumber waiting to be transformed. The rocking chair she'd seen loaded onto the wagon sat in the corner of the room, already assembled. Cans of white paint stood ready beside brushes. "You're building a nursery," Tessa said softly from the doorway. Yates looked up, a sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool night air. "Figured the little one would need somewhere to sleep when it arrives." Tessa stepped into the room, her hand resting on her belly. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he replied, setting down his hammer, "but I wanted to." "Why did you really buy me today, Mr. Xavier?" Yates stood, dusting wood shavings from his clothes. "When Clara died, I thought I'd never have a family, threw myself into the ranch instead, but seeing you there today—" He hesitated. "No child should come into this world unwelcomed. And no mother should face it alone if there's someone who can help." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks. Get some sleep. Baby needs rest." That night, as Tessa lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the distant sounds of Yates working on the nursery, she felt the first stirrings of hope since her husband's death. Whatever tomorrow might bring, for tonight at least, she and her child were safe. Yates worked through most of the night, driven by a purpose he hadn't felt in years. By morning, the crib was complete, needing only paint to finish it. He'd fashioned a small dresser as well, using what he'd been saving for other projects. When dawn broke, he finally sought his own bed for a few hours' rest before the day's ranch work would begin. Tessa woke to the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed in one of the simple dresses Yates had purchased in town, a practical garment with room for her growing belly, and made her way to the kitchen. There she found Yates preparing a simple breakfast of flapjacks. "Good morning," he said, nodding toward the table. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," Tessa replied, taking a seat. "You were up late." Yates placed a plate before her. "Ranch work doesn't wait for tired men. Got to check the herd today, winter's hard on cattle." As they ate, Tessa observed the kitchen with a critical eye. "Your pantry's nearly bare," she noted, "and this place could use a thorough cleaning." "Been managing on my own," Yates said with a shrug. "Do what needs doing." "I'd like to earn my keep," Tessa said firmly. "I can cook, clean, mend. I'm with child, not invalid." A hint of a smile touched Yates' lips. "Fair enough. But don't overdo. My foreman's wife can help with laundry. She comes up from the bunkhouse twice a week for it anyway." After breakfast, Yates introduced Tessa to Miguel Ramirez and his wife, Carmen, who lived in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands. Carmen immediately took to Tessa, offering friendship and assistance with the heavier household tasks. "I have 5 children myself," Carmen told Tessa as they toured the house. "First baby is always the most frightening, but you will do fine. And Senor Yates, he is a good man." "I hardly know him," Tessa admitted. "Yesterday morning I'd never even heard his name." Carmen patted Tessa's arm. "Sometimes God puts us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't understand the journey." The days began to fall into a pattern. Tessa took charge of the household, bringing order to Yates' bachelor existence. She discovered she had a knack for bread making that pleased Yates and the ranch hands alike. In the evenings, while Yates worked on finishing the nursery, Tessa would sew baby clothes from fabric he'd purchased. They existed in a careful dance, 2 strangers bound by an unusual arrangement, each respectful of the other's space and privacy. Yates never entered her bedroom, and Tessa was careful not to pry too deeply into his past sorrows. But slowly, Conversation between them became easier. 2 weeks after Tessa's arrival, a fierce winter storm descended on the ranch, confining everyone to their quarters. Wind howled around the house as snow piled against the windows. With nowhere to go and ranch work limited to essential care of the animals, Yates found himself at loose ends. Tessa was in the kitchen, kneading dough with steady, rhythmic movements when Yates entered with an armload of firewood. "Storm's getting worse," he commented, building up the fire. "Might last a couple of days, according to Miguel." "Good thing we prepared," Tessa replied, glancing at the well-stocked pantry that had been her project the previous week. Yates watched her work, admiring the confident way her hands shaped the dough despite her awkward balance with the baby. "You've made this place different," he said suddenly. Tessa looked up, a light dusting of flour on her cheek. "Different how? It feels like a home again." He cleared his throat. "I didn't realize how empty it was until it wasn't anymore." A comfortable silence fell between them as Tessa continued her baking, and Yates settled into a chair with a ledger, working on ranch accounts. The domesticity of the scene struck them both simultaneously, how easily they'd fallen into sharing this space, this life. That evening, confined by the storm, they sat before the fire after dinner. Tessa worked on a small blanket while Yates carved a wooden horse, a toy for the coming baby. "Tell me about your husband," Yates said quietly, breaking the silence. Tessa's hands stilled. "Thomas was kind enough. We married young. I was 18, he was 20. It wasn't a love match exactly, more a practical arrangement. His family had land adjoining my father's." "You didn't love him?" Yates asked, his knife pausing mid-stroke on the wooden figure. "I was fond of him," Tessa replied thoughtfully. "He was gentle with me, but there weren't sparks, I suppose. He died suddenly. Pneumonia took him in less than a week. His father blamed me somehow, said I hadn't cared for him properly. Used the debts as an excuse to be rid of me." Yates' jaw tightened. No man should sell his son's widow, especially not when she's carrying his grandchild. "The baby was another burden to him, not a blessing," Tessa said, her hand moving to her belly. "Some men are like that. And the baby's father, did he know before he passed?" Tessa nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. "He was pleased. Had big plans for teaching a son to farm or helping a daughter gather eggs. Simple dreams. Simple dreams are often the best kind," Yates observed. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. Tessa and Yates found themselves sharing more stories, filling in the blanks of their lives for each other. She learned about his childhood on the ranch, his brief time away at school in Denver, and his return when his mother fell ill. He discovered her talent for drawing, her dreams of seeing the ocean someday, and her collection of pressed wildflowers she'd been forced to leave behind. By the time the storm broke 3 days later, something had shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained had narrowed, replaced by a growing companionship neither had expected. The nursery was completed by Christmas, a bright, warm room with white painted furniture and cheerful yellow curtains Tessa had sewn. A mobile of wooden animals hung above the crib, Yates' handiwork during the stormy days. A small shelf held children's books, some new from the general store in town, others preserved from Yates' own childhood. Christmas Day brought a modest celebration. Miguel and Carmen joined them for dinner, bringing their children who filled the usually quiet house with laughter. Tessa had decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and prepared a feast that left everyone satisfied. That evening, after their guests had departed, Yates presented Tessa with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much," he said awkwardly as she opened it. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. Tessa opened it to find it empty. "I thought, for the baby," Yates explained. "A little portrait when it comes. Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I haven't had anything so fine since before my parents died." Yates helped her fasten it around her neck, his calloused fingers brushing against her skin. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through them both, and their eyes met in momentary surprise before Yates stepped back. "I have something for you too," Tessa said, retrieving a package from beneath the small tree. "It's practical, I'm afraid." Yates unwrapped the gift to find a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "You made this. When?" "In the evenings after you thought I'd gone to bed," she admitted with a smile. "My hands need to stay busy." He wrapped the scarf around his neck, appreciating its warmth. "No one's made me anything in years," he said quietly. "Thank you, Tessa." As January progressed, Tessa's condition became more pronounced. Her back ached constantly, and climbing the stairs became a challenge. Without discussion, Yates began doing more of the household tasks, insisting she rest more frequently. "I'm not an invalid," she protested one evening when he took the dinner dishes from her hands. "No, but you're growing a whole person inside you," he countered. "That's work enough." One night near the end of January, Tessa found Yates sitting on the porch despite the cold, staring at the stars. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him. "Something troubling you?" she asked. Yates was silent for a long moment. "Been thinking about what happens after." After the baby comes," he clarified, his voice low. "You'll be wanting to make your own way, I expect, start fresh somewhere." The thought sent an unexpected pang through Tessa. I haven't thought that far ahead." "You should," Yates said, still not looking at her. "You're a free woman, Tessa. The money I paid was for your debt, not for you. Once the baby's born and you're recovered, you can go wherever you please. I've put aside some funds to help you start over." Tessa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "You want me to leave?" Now Yates turned to her, his expression pained in the moonlight. "I want you to choose. Your life was taken from you. I don't aim to be another man deciding your path." They sat in silence, both contemplating a separation neither had anticipated would feel so difficult to consider. "And if I chose to stay?" Tessa finally asked, her voice barely audible. Yates' breath caught. "Then this would be your home for as long as you wanted it." Their eyes met, a current of unspoken feelings passing between them. Before either could speak further, Tessa gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "What is it? The baby?" Yates was instantly alert. "Just a very strong kick," Tessa assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her rounded stomach. "Here, feel." Under his palm, Yates felt the firm push of tiny limbs. Wonder spread across his face. "That's something," he murmured. Their hands remained together on her belly, the intimacy of the moment wrapping around them like the blanket on Tessa's shoulders. When the baby kicked again, they both laughed, the sound mingling in the cold night air. The first week of February brought unusually warm days that melted much of the snow. Tessa, now in her final weeks of pregnancy, found relief in being able to walk outside without fighting through drifts. She took to spending afternoons on the porch, enjoying the sunshine while it lasted. Yates had ridden out early that morning to check on a section of fencing that had been reported damaged. Carmen had come up to help with laundry, but had returned to the bunkhouse after lunch. Tessa was alone when the first pain gripped her, sharp and unmistakable. She gripped the porch railing, breathing through it as Carmen had instructed her. "Too soon," she whispered to herself. "You're not due for another 2 weeks, little one." The baby, it seemed, had other plans. A second contraction followed 20 minutes later, then another. By mid-afternoon, they were coming regularly, and Tessa knew the baby was indeed coming. She made her way inside to prepare as best she could, laying out the supplies she'd readied weeks before. When Miguel came to the house to ask about dinner plans for the ranch hands, he found Tessa leaning against the kitchen table, breathing heavily through a contraction. "Senora, the baby comes?" he asked, instantly concerned. "Yes," Tessa managed. "Please, send someone for Yates and ask Carmen to come." Miguel hurried away, dispatching a ranch hand to find Yates while he fetched his wife. Carmen arrived quickly, assessing the situation with experienced eyes. "First babies often take their time," she assured Tessa, helping her to bed. "But everything is ready, and you are strong." Hours passed with no sign of Yates. The ranch hand returned at sunset, reporting he'd found the damaged fence but no sign of Yates or his horse. "Must have gone farther than expected," he suggested. Tessa tried to focus on Carmen's instructions rather than worry about Yates' absence. As night fell, her labor intensified, the contractions coming closer together and lasting longer. Carmen remained steadfast, providing encouragement and practical assistance. "I wish Yates were here," Tessa admitted during a brief respite between pains. Carmen stroked her forehead with a damp cloth. "He will come, and soon you will have your child in your arms." Near midnight, as a full moon rose over the ranch, Tessa's labor reached its peak. With Carmen coaching her through the final pushes, she brought her child into the world, a robust boy with a strong cry that filled the room. "A son," Carmen announced joyfully, cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing him in Tessa's arms. "A beautiful, healthy son." Tessa gazed down at her child, overcome with love and exhaustion. His tiny face was red with the effort of his entry into the world, his dark hair damp against his head. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." As Carmen helped Tessa clean up and settle comfortably with the baby, they heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Minutes later, Yates burst through the door, his face etched with worry. "The baby?" he asked immediately, his gaze going to the bundle in Tessa's arms. "A boy," Tessa said, smiling tiredly, "born just a little while ago." Yates moved to the bedside, his expression softening as he looked down at the infant. "He's perfect," he murmured. "Where were you?" Tessa asked, noticing the mud on his clothes and the exhaustion in his face. "Horse threw me when a rattler spooked him," Yates explained. "Wrenched my ankle badly enough I couldn't walk far, had to splint it and wait for the horse to calm down enough to catch him." He shook his head. "Shouldn't have gone so far alone." Carmen discreetly left the room, giving them privacy. "Would you like to hold him?" Tessa offered. Hesitation flickered across Yates' face. "It's been a long time since I held a baby." "It's like riding a horse," Tessa teased gently. "You don't forget how." With careful movements, Yates took the newborn in his arms, cradling him with surprising tenderness. The baby yawned, his tiny fist escaping the blanket. Instinctively, Yates offered his finger, which the infant grasped with surprising strength. "He'll need a name," Yates said, unable to take his eyes off the child. "I was thinking of William," Tessa replied. "After my father." "William," Yates repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." As dawn approached, with little William fed and sleeping peacefully in the cradle Yates had built, the new mother finally allowed herself to rest. Yates remained in a chair beside her bed, unwilling to leave them even to tend to his own injuries. "You should let Carmen look at that ankle," Tessa murmured sleepily. "It'll keep," Yates assured her. "Sleep now. You've done the hardest work a person can do today." As Tessa drifted off, Yates watched over her and the baby, a protective feeling sweeping through him that went beyond mere responsibility. In the quiet of the early morning, he admitted to himself what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He had fallen in love with Tessa Adams. The days following William's birth established new patterns in the Xavier household. Tessa recovered quickly, though Yates insisted she rest as much as possible. He took to bringing the baby to her for feedings, then walking the floors with him afterward, singing old cowboy songs in a low, soothing voice. Carmen visited daily, bringing hearty soups and practical advice on infant care. The other ranch hands found excuses to stop by the main house, each wanting to pay respects to the newest addition to the ranch. "Never seen the boss like this," Miguel commented to his wife one evening as they watched Yates gently rocking William on the porch. "Not even before Senora Clara died." Carmen smiled knowingly. "Some men are born to be fathers. They just need the chance." By the time William was 2 weeks old, Tessa was up and about, gradually resuming her household duties. Yates had fashioned a sling that allowed her to carry William against her chest while keeping her hands free, though he often insisted on taking the baby himself. One evening, as Tessa sat in the rocking chair nursing William, she broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "We should talk about the future," she said softly, "about what happens now." Yates looked up from the bridle he was mending. "What do you want to happen?" Tessa considered her words carefully. "When you found me at that auction, I had nothing, no home, no future, no hope. You gave me all three." She stroked William's cheek as he nursed. "But I don't want to be a burden or an obligation." "Is that what you think you are?" Yates set aside his work, focusing fully on her. "I don't know what I am," Tessa admitted. "A housekeeper, a friend, a charity case." Yates moved to kneel beside the rocking chair. "You're the woman who brought life back to this house, who reminds me every day that there's more to living than just working from sunrise to sunset." He touched William's tiny hand. "You and this little one, you've become everything to me." Tessa's heart quickened. "What are you saying, Yates?" "I'm saying I love you, Tessa Adams, not out of pity or obligation, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, the way you hum when you think no one's listening." He took her free hand in his. "I know it's soon, and I know William's father hasn't been gone long. I'm not asking for promises, just don't leave. Not yet." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the night you stayed up building this nursery." Yates raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "Then stay. Be part of this ranch, this life. Let me be part of yours and William's." "Yes," Tessa replied simply, her heart full. Their first kiss came later that evening, after William had been settled in his crib. A gentle, questioning touch of lips that deepened into something that promised a future neither had dared hope for months before. Spring brought new life to the Xavier ranch. Calves were born, wildflowers bloomed across the pastures, and William grew stronger each day. Tessa flourished in her new role, not just as a mother but as the heart of the household. She planted a vegetable garden near the house, started a flock of chickens, and began keeping bees for honey. Yates watched her transformation with admiration, aware that the woman who had stood trembling on the auction block was revealing her true self, capable, determined, and full of plans. They continued to grow closer, sharing not just their days but increasingly their hopes and dreams. In late April, Yates rode into town and returned with Reverend Miller, Seligman's circuit preacher who visited the outlying ranches monthly. That evening, with Miguel and Carmen as witnesses and 3-month-old William cradled in Carmen's arms, Tessa and Yates exchanged simple vows on the porch of the house that had become their home. "I never thought I'd find love again," Yates said as they stood facing each other. "You and William are the greatest blessing a man could ask for." "You saved us," Tessa replied, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. "Not just our lives, but our future. I promise to build that future with you every day we're given." The modest gold band Yates placed on her finger caught the setting sun, glinting with promise as Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife. That night, After Yates had carried William to the nursery and returned to the bedroom they would now share, he took Tessa in his arms with reverent gentleness. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her eyes. "We can wait if you need more time." Tessa reached up to touch his face. "I've never been more sure of anything," she assured him. "I love you, Yates Xavier. I'm ready to be your wife in every way." Their coming together was tender at first, both nervous despite their previous marriages. But as trust and desire intertwined, they found a passion neither had experienced before, a connection that went beyond physical need to something that spoke of souls recognizing each other. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with Tessa's head on his chest, Yates marveled at the turn his life had taken. "6 months ago, I thought I'd live out my days alone," he murmured into her hair. "Now I can't imagine a day without you and William." "Life has strange ways of giving us what we need," Tessa replied, tracing patterns on his skin. "Even when it comes in packages we never expected." Summer passed in a haze of contentment. The ranch prospered, with Yates breaking a particularly fine group of horses that brought excellent prices at the territorial fair in Prescott. William thrived, growing into a cheerful baby who delighted in exploring the world around him. His first tooth, first attempts at crawling, and first words were celebrated as major accomplishments. Tessa surprised Yates with her head for business, suggesting improvements to the ranch operations that increased their efficiency. She began keeping the ledgers, discovering a talent for numbers that complemented Yates' practical knowledge of ranching. "We make a good team," Yates observed one evening as they reviewed the quarterly accounts together. "You see things I miss." "Different experiences bring different perspectives," Tessa replied. "Together we see the whole picture." As William's first birthday approached in February, Tessa realized she had been feeling unusually tired for several weeks. At first, she attributed it to the busy life of ranching and mothering, but when morning sickness began, she recognized the symptoms. She waited until they were alone one evening, William already asleep and the house quiet, to share the news with Yates. "I believe we'll need to prepare the nursery for a second occupant," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Yates' eyes widened. "Truly?" "Another baby," Tessa nodded, smiling at the wonder in his expression. "Due in late summer, I think." Yates gathered her into his arms, his joy evident in the tender kiss he pressed to her lips. "A brother or sister for William," he marveled. "Our child." "The first of ours, yes," Tessa agreed, resting her head against his chest. "Though William is as much yours now as if you'd fathered him." "He is," Yates agreed fiercely, "from the moment I first held him." As Tessa's pregnancy progressed, they decided to expand the nursery to accommodate both children. Yates built a second crib and Tessa sewed new curtains and bedding. William, now walking with increasing confidence, watched the preparations with curiosity. "Baby," he would say, patting Tessa's growing belly with gentle hands. "Baby, come." The summer heat was at its peak when Tessa went into labor in early August. Unlike William's birth, this time Yates was present from the first contraction, sending for Carmen while helping Tessa prepare. The labor was shorter but no less intense, and as the sun set on August 7, 1880, Catherine Xavier entered the world with lusty cries that announced her arrival to the entire ranch. "She has your eyes," Yates said in wonder, cradling his newborn daughter. "And quite possibly your spirit, judging by those lungs." Tessa laughed tiredly. "She'll need that spirit with a big brother to keep up with." William, who had been staying with Miguel and Carmen during the birth, was brought to meet his sister the next morning. Under Yates' careful supervision, the toddler peered into the cradle, his expression serious. "Baby," he said definitively, then looked up at his parents with a proud smile. "My baby." "That's right," Yates agreed, ruffling the boy's dark hair. "Your sister. You'll help take care of her, won't you?" William nodded solemnly, accepting this new responsibility with the seriousness only a young child can muster for such moments. As Catherine grew, it became clear she had inherited her mother's determination and her father's steady temperament. By her first birthday, she was attempting to follow William everywhere, crawling with surprising speed and pulling herself up on furniture in an effort to walk. The bond between the siblings was strong from the start, with William taking his role as big brother seriously. He shared his toys willingly, showed remarkable patience when Catherine grabbed his hair, and fiercely protected her from any perceived threat, including an unfortunate chicken that wandered too close to her blanket during an outdoor picnic. Life on the Xavier Ranch settled into a rhythm of seasons and milestones. The garden expanded, the herd grew, and improvements were made to the house each year. Tessa started a small side business selling honey and preserves in Seligman, building a reputation for quality that brought customers from as far as Flagstaff. When Catherine was 2, Tessa discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous ones, with prolonged morning sickness and unusual fatigue. Yates insisted on bringing in additional help for the household, hiring a young woman from town to assist with the children and chores several days a week. "You're doing too much," he told Tessa firmly when she protested. "The ranch can afford it, and you need the rest." In March 1883, after a long and difficult labor, Tessa gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Elizabeth. The double blessing brought twice the joy and twice the work, but the Xavier family adjusted with the resilience they'd developed through years of facing challenges together. William, now 4 years old, was fascinated by the tiny babies and constantly asked to help care for them. Catherine viewed the newcomers with more suspicion, occasionally attempting to return them to the cradle when they cried too much, but eventually warming to her role as older sister. As the children grew, the ranch expanded to meet the needs of the growing family. Yates added a second story to the bunkhouse to accommodate more hands during busy seasons. The profits from the cattle operation and horse training allowed for modernizations to the main house, a proper bathroom with indoor plumbing, a larger kitchen with an improved stove, and eventually a piano for the children's lessons. Tessa never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to a very different fate. Each year on the anniversary of the auction, she and Yates would make a private donation to help women in difficult circumstances. When a young widow with 2 small children arrived in Seligman in 1885, it was the Xaviers who provided her with a job and a small cabin on their property. "We're just passing on what was given to us," Tessa explained when the woman tried to express her gratitude. Everyone deserves a chance to build a life. As the children grew older, education became a priority. Tessa had received a good education in her youth and took charge of the children's early schooling herself. When William reached 10, Yates hired a full-time tutor who lived in a small house built specifically for that purpose near the main house. "I want them to have choices," Yates explained to Tessa one evening as they watched the children playing in the yard. "The ranch will always be here if they want it, but they should be prepared for whatever path calls to them." "William already says he wants to be a doctor," Tessa noted, "and Catherine talks about law school." Yates smiled. "The twins will probably want to be circus performers, judging by their climbing abilities." Life wasn't without its challenges. The harsh winter of 1887 brought illness that swept through the ranch, leaving Tessa bedridden for weeks and taking the life of one of the older ranch hands. A drought the following summer threatened the cattle operation, forcing difficult decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell at reduced prices. Through each crisis, Tessa and Yates found strength in each other, their partnership deepening with each passing year. Their love, begun in the most unlikely of circumstances, had grown roots that weathered whatever storms came their way. In 1890, as William prepared to leave for school in Denver, the first step toward his goal of becoming a physician, Tessa and Yates celebrated 12 years together. The auction block and the desperate young woman who had stood upon it seemed like another lifetime, though neither ever forgot the circumstances that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Tessa asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had countless times over the years. "Buying me that day," Yates took her hand, his thumb running over the wedding band he'd placed there. "Only one regret," he said seriously. "What's that?" Tessa asked, genuinely curious. "That I almost rode out of town that morning without seeing you at all." He brought her hand to his lips. "Everything good in my life came from that moment. You, the children, this family we've built. How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" Tessa leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "From auction block to this," she marveled softly. "Life takes the strangest turns." "And thank God it does," Yates replied, wrapping his arm around her as the Arizona sun set on another day of the life. They'd built together a life neither could have imagined that cold December day in Seligman, when fate had brought them together in the unlikeliest of ways. As the years continued to pass, the Xavier Ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its fine horses and cattle, but for the family that ran it. William completed his medical studies and returned to Arizona, establishing a practice in Flagstaff while still making regular visits home. Catherine, true to her childhood declarations, pursued law and became one of the first female attorneys in the territory, using her position to advocate for women's rights and land reform. The twins, James and Elizabeth, chose different paths. James discovered a talent for architecture during the expansion of the ranch buildings, and eventually opened his own firm in Phoenix. Elizabeth, who had inherited Yates' affinity for horses, took over the training operation at the ranch, developing new techniques that attracted buyers from across the West. Through it all, Tessa and Yates remained the heart of the family and the ranch. Their partnership, forged in unusual circumstances and tempered by years of shared joys and sorrows, stood as an example to their children and grandchildren of what love could build. In 1903, 25 years after that fateful auction, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for an anniversary celebration. The property had grown from Yates' original holdings to one of the largest operations in northern Arizona. The main house, expanded several times over the years, now accommodated large family gatherings with ease. As twilight fell on the celebration, Yates led Tessa away from the festivities to the old nursery, now converted to a sewing room but still bearing traces of its original purpose in the carefully preserved crib that stood in one corner. "You remember that first night?" Yates asked, his voice soft with memory. "When I stayed up building this for a baby that wasn't even mine yet," Tessa nodded, emotion tightening her throat. "I remember thinking no one had ever done something so thoughtful for me before. It gave me hope when I needed it most." Yates drew her into his arms, his touch still sending warmth through her after all their years together. "I built a crib that night, but you built a home around it. You made this ranch more than land and cattle. You made it a place where people belong." "We built it together," Tessa corrected gently. "Each piece by piece, day by day." As they rejoined their family children, grandchildren, and the extended family of ranch hands who had been with them for decades, Tessa reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate young widow on an auction block to the matriarch of this thriving family, her life had transcended anything she could have imagined in those dark days. "What are you thinking about, Mother?" William asked, noticing her thoughtful expression as she watched the younger generation playing in the yard. Tessa smiled, reaching for Yates' hand. "I'm thinking about beginnings," she said, "and how sometimes the worst days of our lives can lead to the best ones, if we just hold on long enough to see what comes next." Yates squeezed her hand, the gesture carrying the weight of their shared history. "And if we're fortunate enough to find someone to hold on with," he added. As the stars appeared above the ranch that had been their home for 25 years, Tessa and Yates stood surrounded by the family they had built, not just the children of their blood, but the community they had created through acts of kindness and courage. The nursery built on that first night had become a foundation for generations, a testament to how love could transform lives when given the chance to grow. The auction block was a distant memory now, but Tessa never forgot its lessons about human cruelty, but also about unexpected redemption. She had passed those lessons to her children and they to theirs. That compassion could change destinies, that second chances were worth giving, and that homes were built not of lumber and nails but of love and belonging. In the end, that was the legacy of Tessa and Yates Xavier, not just the prosperous ranch or the successful children, but the example they set of how life's darkest moments could lead to its brightest if met with an open heart, and the courage to build something new from the ruins of what was lost.